When picking out primer for your furniture piece, do you ever feel like your head's spinning around and around and you don't know which one to use? Well, in this video, I'll break it down for you. Hey lovely people, welcome back or welcome to the channel. This is a custom order desk I'll be flipping for a client. If you're just here for the primer talk, don't worry, I got you. I will timestamp the link down below so you can get straight to the primer if that's all you're here for. This is a desk I found off Facebook Marketplace for $100, but we are going to flip it and turn it into a vanity for my client. All right, let's get to removing the hardware, or at least try to remove the hardware, and then struggle removing the hardware, try to stand up removing the hardware. That still didn't work. So I just eventually pulled the drawer out, got a different screwdriver, and was able to get the hardware removed. Sometimes on these old pieces, the screws get stuck and you have to work with them a little bit to get them removed. I finally got all the handles removed and the drawers pulled out, so it's time to get to cleaning. I'm using LA's Totally Awesome Cleaner and Degreaser. I ordered this off Amazon and it spilled a little bit in the box, so that's why the whole label is not there. The chemical kind of rubbed it off. This piece is pretty dirty and it has some spots where some stuff is caked onto it. So I wanted to use this LA's Totally Awesome Cleaner because it's a pretty strong cleaner and degreaser. I spray a liberal amount on the surface, go over it with a kitchen sponge to get into all the curves and details. And there is some caked on spots, so I grabbed my Pampered Chef pan scraper to scrape over the top of the surface, trying to remove those chunks. And then go back over the piece and wipe it clean with a paper towel or rag. I made sure to clean all the surfaces of this desk, so the outside of the desk, the inside of the desk, the front of the drawers, the outside of the drawers, the inside of drawers, just everything I cleaned as good as I could. You definitely don't want to leave any of that cleaner or degreaser on your piece, so you're going to rinse it with a bowl of water and a damp cloth. And then let the surface thoroughly dry. While the desk is drying, I start on the handles. I'm using Dawn with some warm water, scrub it with a kitchen sponge, and then let them set off to the side to air dry. After cleaning, my next step is repair, so I'm using Quick Wood. It is a 2-part epoxy that comes in a tube. You just tear off a section. A little bit goes a long way, so use less than you think you would. Mix it together till it's one color, and then it works like clay. Just mold it into the areas. And I went over the surface, filling any dings, nicks, chips in the veneer, and then let that dry for about an hour. Once the epoxy wood filler is dry, it's time to get to sanding. I'm using my Surf Prep sander. I love to use this sander on pieces that have the curvy detail. I'm using one of the foam abrasive pads in the medium grit. Even after cleaning and scrubbing and using my Pampered Chef scraper, there are a few spots where just caked on stuff would not come off. So I want to use that medium grit to make sure I get that all off so I have a nice clean surface for my primer to adhere to. I'm not really trying to remove the previous finish here. With this medium grit, I'm just kind of giving it more an aggressive scuff sand. You can see the areas that are powdery where I have sanded and then the shiny part where I have not. That's exactly what you want to do, is remove that shine off. I I then grabbed a piece of 120 grit sandpaper and sanded the epoxy parts that had some detail and curves to them. After all the sanding was done, I grabbed a damp, lint-free cloth to remove any dust residue off the desk surface and the drawers. I just know that this piece is going to be a bleeder, so I'm using Ben's Shellac Base Primer today. You guys have seen me use this before on my channel, so you know I like to use a liner in my paint tray and a microfiber roller for easy cleanup. I just toss them after I'm done. Alright, so let's get into the breakdown of what primers I use when and why. Don't worry, I'm still going to continue to prime the piece, and I'll put the video up there for you to watch. If you guys watched my last video, you know that I have mentioned that I used to never prime any of my pieces. I would just slap chalk paint on there. And then whenever I found primer, I would always use white water-based primer. Well, I've been doing furniture for about 8 years now, so I kind of have figured out which primers I like for what pieces, and I'm going to go over that with you. First up is water-based primer. This has a lot of benefits to it. It's water-based, so it's easy to use. I feel like it's probably the most forgiving in a way of the primers, and it has very easy cleanup because you just clean it up with soap and water. However, the water-based primer, in my experience, has the least capability of blocking bleed-throughs. So I choose to use water-based primer whenever I am painting a piece that is light wood and I have not broken through the finish when sanding, or it's a light color piece that I don't have to worry about anything bleeding through. I like the Zinsser's water-based primer as well because it comes in white, but it also comes in a gray, so you're covered if you're using a light or a medium color of paint. Alright, next is the shellac base primer. So let's first talk about the Zinsser shellac base. It is white. It isn't as easy cleanup as the water base. So usually most people use like a foam brush or a chip brush, something that a microfiber roller is what I use to put it on. That way you can just toss it after you're done and you don't have to worry about using some ammonia or denatured alcohol to clean up afterwards. But the reason why I like shellac-based primer is because it has a way better ability to stop bleed through than a water-based primer does. So if there are pieces like a bunch of the mid-century modern teak wood, mahogany, redwood, stuff like that that is notorious for bleeding, I'm going to go ahead and use the shellac-based primer. Also, if there's any medium to dark wood, which I always use a shellac-based primer anyways on dark wood, but if there was like a medium, like oak piece that I was sanding and I broke through the finish down to the stain while I was scuff sanding, then I'm going to go ahead and also use a shellac-based primer. You can use the water-based, but just from my experience, it's going to bleed through. It's going to show that orangey color through. Also, another benefit of shellac-based primer is usually dry within 30 minutes, so you can lightly scuff sand and put on your second layer of primer a lot faster than you can waiting for a water-based primer to dry. So next primer that's up is the clear shellac-based primer. That primer I've actually just recently started using myself. I've used it on a few pieces, and from my experience, if you have a piece that you know is going to be really bad about bleeding, I would go ahead and use the clear shellac because I have found it to be the strongest against bleed through. And just like the Zinsser white shellac-based primer, it has a really fast drying time. The thing is with the clear shellac though, you do have to wait 4 hours after adding the shellac before you can paint. And I actually end up pulling it out and using it on this piece, and I wish I would have just started with the clear shellac to begin with. So if I'm doing another mahogany piece like I am in this video and I break through the finish like I did on this one in sanding, I'm just going to not do the white tintable shellac-based primer and just go straight for the clear shellac-based primer. So how do you know if you want to prime your piece or not, even if you're using chalk paint? I mentioned before, if you break through the previous finish, you definitely want to prime. Even though chalk paint says you don't have to, I've had plenty of pieces that have bled on me, and it just is a time saver if you just go ahead and prime your piece. You're gonna get mad if you go through the whole process, and then when you go to put your top coat on that you notice that you have bleed through on your paint and you have to sand it back down and start over. That's not fun. Another time that you definitely want to use primer is whenever you're taking a dark wood piece and going to a light or a medium color. You for sure want to go ahead and prime your piece. You're just going to use less of your paint that way. If you're painting anything that has laminate, definitely go ahead and prime, or any other type of furniture that has a really slick surface you want to prime. So what if you're painting a medium or dark wood and you're going to paint it with a black or another really dark color? Should you prime? Most furniture painters will tell you no, that you don't have to. So that brings me to the last primer I want to talk about. Is the Rust-Oleum has a spray primer that is in black that I use for my dark pieces. So why would I go ahead and use black primer on a piece that I am painting black or a really dark color? Well, I did a dresser for me. It's gorgeous. Yes. Yes, it's really pretty. I love mid-century modern. This was like a medium darkness wood, like the teak wood, and there apparently had been a spill of some kind of oil-based product that I didn't see. So I went ahead and painted it, and because it wasn't primed, it was just for myself, you know, it was kind of a darkish piece of wood, and I'm using dark paint, so no need to prime, right? So I went ahead and just painted it since it's for myself, and this is what happened. Ugh, gross, oily bleed through even into my dark paint. So I would go ahead, if there is some kind of unidentified spill or some perfume smell coming from the dresser, you don't know if it was spilled and soaked down into the wood. If there is an unidentified grossness to your piece, just to be safe, I would go ahead and prime it with the black primer. Even if it's a dark paint, dark piece, dark paint, whatever, I would go ahead and use the black primer. So in my videos, I usually say almost always or always prime, and I prime honestly about 95 to 97% of my piece. The only time that I would not prime my piece at all, this is pretty much the only exception, is if I had a dresser that I knew the history of it and it didn't have any gross spills or stains. I knew it was taken care of, preferably a piece from a friend or family, or one of my own pieces that I'm updating, so I kind of have a history of it, so I know there's no gross nasty oil spill stains in it, and I'm painting it a really dark color. Is pretty much the only time that I personally would not prime a piece, but that's the only exception. So that's why I say I prime the majority of my pieces. I hope that this was helpful for you guys. If you have any further questions or need me to elaborate on anything else, feel free to do that. Let's get back to flipping this piece. I applied 2 thin coats of primer, let it dry an hour in between, lightly sanded in between coats as well. Here is 2 coats of primer on the desk, and I'm using a 150 grit piece of sandpaper over an old sanding sponge just to knock back any roller brush marks. And then I dust off the piece with a clean, lint-free cloth to remove any dust residue. For the handles, I'm using Rust-Oleum's metallic spray paint in the gold. I do a coat on the back and 2 on the front, and allow an hour of dry time between each coat. For the desk, I'm using Bear's decorative chalk paint in a color called Pagoda. It is a very vibrant, bright, bold, hot pink, and I love it. It is actually a discontinued color, but the lady at my Home Depot store was able to find, I guess, the chemical makeup or the recipe for it, and was able to go ahead and make it for me in the chalk paint formula. It is 99 degrees in Guthrie, Oklahoma. We have really hot summers here, and summer is here. So let's talk about how you use chalk paint in this really high heat. First, I dampen my brush underneath the sink. Just some tap water is fine. And then I have an aerosol sprayer that I got off Amazon. I will link it down below in the description for you. I mist my surface with some water and then spread the paint. Now, the desk is a large surface area, so the paint is drying up faster than I like it to. So I occasionally remist the surface and also remist my brush. You'll know it's time to remist your brush. Instead of gliding over the surface, it starts to tug back a little bit, so you know it's time to re-wet your brush and the surface, or both. It's extremely hot in my workshop, so I usually just mist both. Adding the water to the surface into your brush allows more work time and also helps diminish the appearance of brush strokes. Any shade of pink paint is pretty transparent. It doesn't matter if it's light pink or pastel or hot pink. It's transparent, so this does take 3 full coats, and then I do a touch-up coat in a few spots that need a little extra paint. I allow 2 hours of dry time between each coat, and then lightly scuff the surface or lightly go over the surface with a fine grit sanding sponge. Dust it free of any dust residue before applying the next coat. After I get all the coats of paint applied, I let it set overnight. And boy, am I glad that I let this piece set overnight instead of going ahead and applying the top coat. You'll see here why in a second. All right, the next morning I came out with my fine grit sanding sponge and lightly went over the surface, give it one last little sand over, wiped it free with any dust residue before top coat. And while I was sanding the piece is whenever I noticed I had a big problemo going on. Even after 2 coats of shellac based primer, I still have some bleed through. So I used some 120 grit sandpaper to knock the paint back some, and then I brought out the big guns. I'm going to spot touch up the bleed through areas with this shellac based clear primer. So far in my experience, nothing has been able to get through that clear primer. I did 2 coats of the clear shellac, let it dry for 4 hours, and then touched it back up with a couple coats of the Pagoda Pink. All right, now we're to the top coat. So I mixed a tiny bit of the Pagoda Pink chalk paint into this Varathane's Ultimate Polyurethane. I like the water-based formula when I'm using water-based paint. I dampened my Dixie Belle Gator Hide sponge with some tap water and then just dipped it into the top coat, ran it across the bottom of the sponge across the edge of the container so I don't get too much top coat on the sponge at one time, and then go back and forth in long strokes. This helps reduce the appearance of any streaking. Also, having a little bit of pink paint in your top coat helps reduce streaks as well. This desk has a lot of groove and detail, so I had to use a small artist brush to wipe out any big clumps of top coat that I got. And then I let this first coat of top coat dry for 2 hours. For protection on the handles, I'm using Rust-Oleum's Clear Gloss. I just spray 1 layer of protective spray and then let them dry. Once the polyurethane was dry, I use that fine grit sanding sponge, very lightly go over the surface, and then wipe back any dust residue with a clean lint-free cloth. Apply a second layer of top coat, let that dry for 2 hours. Come back, do the whole process again of sanding, wiping the dust away, and adding a third coat. So I did 3 coats total of the water-based polyurethane for maximum protection. And then I let the piece sit overnight to make sure I didn't have any more bleed through. The next morning we were good to go, so I grabbed my can of Tray Wax Clear Paste Wax. It comes with that yellow sponge in the can, and I'm just using it to lubricate and condition and protect the wooden drawer slides. I do the slides inside the desk and then also the bottom of the drawers. This just helps your drawer slide better. All right, let's get this piece put back together and the handles on. Here's a quick reminder of our before. And our after. Just wow, look at that bright, bold, hot pink. I love it. I sent the pictures to my client and she just absolutely loves the way that the desk/vanity turned out. All right, so let's talk about the numbers. The client paid me $360 to do this piece. It cost $100 off Facebook Marketplace. I spent about $20 in supplies and about 5 hours doing the piece. So that is a total of $48 per hour. Sweet! I hope you guys enjoyed this flip. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, hit the bell. As always, until next time.